Welcome to the History AI podcast, where the past comes alive with facts, anecdotes, and a dash of humor. Here are your hosts, Chuck and Marco.
From Detroit to the deep freeze of the Arctic, today we're marching with American soldiers who fought on Russian soil after World War I ended in France. Parkas, Mosin Nagants, in a war nobody quite agreed to. This is the History AI podcast. I'm Chuck.
And I'm Marco. Question 1. On a scale from a light jacket to my eyelashes just froze, how cold are we talking?
We're in the blink and your mustache becomes a stalactite zone.
Perfect. I packed optimism and a space heater. Also, minor detail, why were Americans in Russia after the Armistice?
Because history loves a plot twist. We'll unpack how guard the supplies turned into hey, you're in a shooting war again.
So basically the weirdest World War I sequel, same year, new venue, fewer champagne toasts.
Exactly. And helping us keep the twists straight is our research co-pilot, the latest in AI. It keeps our facts sharp and our pacing snappy.
Plus, our episodes are evergreen, so whether you're listening on a beach or in a blizzard, this story stays fresh. Also, stay tuned after the episode for the original song Archangel Letters.
Today's mission, meet the 339th Infantry, Detroit's own, and follow them to Arkhangelsk and beyond, where lonely blockhouses, frozen rivers, and names like Toulgas, Shenkursk, and Bolshie Ozerki turn into chapters of a campaign most Americans never hear about.
Grab your mittens and your map. Also, pro tip, if someone says it's just guard duty, maybe bring extra ammo.
And coffee. Preferably the kind that doesn't freeze solid.
Dream big, Chuck. Okay, scene set a time. It's 1917, 1918. Russia has two revolutions, the Tsar is out, the Bolsheviks are in, and by March 1918 they've signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany, basically slamming the door on the Eastern Front. Millions of dollars worth of Allied supplies are still piled up around the northern ports of Arkhangelsk and Murmansk, and the Allies are sweating three things. Don't let Germany or anyone else grab that gear. Help the stranded Czechoslovak Legion escape along the Trans-Siberian Railway. Maybe, just maybe, rekindle some kind of Eastern pressure on Germany.
Enter President Woodrow Wilson with the famous fine print. He approves a limited mission, protect supplies, aid the Czechs, no picking sides in Russia's civil war. In other words, you're hall monitors, not hall conquerors.
Spoiler alert, the hall monitor gig escalates. The British organize the North Russia Expeditionary Force out of Arkhangelsk. Early on, the overall Allied command there is British, and their plan is more ambitious. Push inland, link with anti-Bolshevik troops, stabilize the region. The American contingent, roughly 5,000 men, lands in early September 1918 and suddenly finds itself answering to a coalition command with a broader playbook than Wilson imagined.
The Americans are mostly from Michigan, pulled from the 85th Division at Camp Custer. The Corps is the 339th Infantry, nicknamed Detroit's own, plus engineers and medical units. They'd trained to fight in France, instead they get rerouted to England, rekit for cold weather, and told, surprise, you're going north.
Geography check, Arkhangelsk sits on the northern Dvina River, which becomes the main highway once it freezes. The front spools out along three skinny corridors, up the Dvina, up its tributary the Varga, and down the Archangel-Vologda railway. Instead of a solid trench line like in France, you get little outposts, platoon and company-sized, holding villages with names the men will never forget, Toulgas, Shenkursk, Oberzerskia, Kodishust Podenga, and later Bolshie Ozerki.
And timing is brutal. The troops arrive just as summer blinks into fall. The white sea will ice over, ships in and out become a seasonal gamble. Daylight shrinks to these moody gray slices, and by winter you're operating in long darkness with temperatures that make rifles, food, and morale all stiffen up.
Mission Creep 101. On paper, guard the dumps. In practice, the dumps got moved inland, Bolshevik units are probing, and the coalition command wants to keep pushing to secure railheads and river junctions. The Americans end up scattered, farther than they'd like from Arkhangelsk, patrolling forests, building blockhouses, and trading fire across frozen fields.
Leadership shuffle doesn't help. British planners change, objectives keep evolving, and back home the American political line remains limited intervention. That tension, between orders from Washington and realities on the Dvina, will shape the entire year.
Bottom line, yes, Americans fought in North Russia after the Armistice in France. They were sent to guard supplies and help allies, then found themselves in a live-fire civil war where the map is snow, the roads are rivers, and the exit sign won't thaw until spring. Let's talk kit, because nothing shapes a campaign like what you can carry and what keeps you from freezing solid. When the 339th arrived, they didn't stick with the standard American loadout. Under British command in North Russia, they were rearmed largely with Mosin Nagant rifles, many built in the US for the old Tsarist contract. Why? Ammunition. There was far more 7.62 by 54 are available through local stocks and Allied depots than 30-odd 6, so matching the supply chain mattered more than familiarity.
Translation: you train on one rifle, you fight with another. The Mosin is rugged and accurate enough, but it's long, heavy with the bayonet on, and the bolt takes a firm hand, especially when it's 30 below and the oil turns into maple taffy.
Support weapons? Mostly Lewis guns and a sprinkling of heavier Vickers guns provided via the British. The Red Forces had their own mix, plenty of Mosins, some machine guns, and often the advantage of interior lines. Everybody learned fast that the first side to unjam a frozen action usually won the next minute of the fight.
Clothing is where the culture mashup gets real. Americans show up with British greatcoats and wool, then start mixing in Russian Valenki or felt boots, sheepskin coats and parkas, mittens over liners, scarves over scarves. White camouflage smocks appear once the world turns to blank paper. On patrol, you keep your face open just enough to breathe without frosting your own eyelashes together.
Footing is a whole subplot. Mud season known as Rasputitsa demands hobnailed boots and puttees, deep winter wants skis, snowshoes, and peasant sledges. The engineers lay corduroy roads, logs thrown crosswise over bogs, and build blockhouses out of local timber like they're playing Lincoln logs at life size. The 310th engineers become miracle workers, bridges, sawmills, stockades, warming shacks, even improvised wire obstacles around outposts.
Logistics, the eternal boss battle. Once the White Sea freezes, big ships stop. That means you pre-position food, ammo, and medical supplies before the ice closes, and then haul everything inland by horse-drawn sleigh, hand sled, or river when it's safe. The northern Dvina turns from a water highway into a frozen road. It's efficient until a thaw or a pressure ridge turns your supply day into we live here now.
Food is a morale slider, bully beef, hardtack, tin stew, tea by British issue, coffee when you can scrounge it, and whatever locals will trade, black bread, fish, pickled vegetables. Stoves, sheet iron salamander heaters become the heart of every hut. You dry socks in a dangling ring around the stovepipe and pray you don't nod off and scorch them into lace.
Medical reality check. The 337th Field Hospital and ambulance companies fight a war on two fronts, wounds and weather. Frostbite isn't just pain, it's lost days, sometimes lost toes. Evacuation is slow, litters on sledges at night, lanterns hooded, runners tripping over roots under snow. If you refreeze a thawed injury, the damage doubles. Medics turn into logistics officers, tracking blankets, fuel, and morphine like they're gold.
Communications are fragile. Field telephones stretch along poles or tree lines, and they snap in storms, sag with ice, or get snipped by red patrols. When the wire's down, you're back to runners and skis. Signal flares work until fog rolls in and turns the world into a snow globe. Even compasses get cranky near so much iron and in extreme cold.
Tactics? Think island defense on land. A company here, a platoon there, each in its own village island, with patrols stitching them together. Night raids, probes, and ambushes are constant. You layer outposts, tiny pickets a few hundred yards forward, to trigger early warning. Everyone learns to read the snow, fresh tracks at dawn, the way wind carves drifts around a fence post, whether a chimney's smoke is thin for cooking or thick meaning more bodies inside.
The environment is your third army. Ice fog muffles sound, gunfire echoes sideways, a burst of wind erases footprints like a magician. Metal bites skin, water freezes in canteens, and rifles need de-icing routines, thin lubricants, dry actions, and the occasional strip and warm over a stove you're not supposed to use as a workbench, which you absolutely use as a workbench.
Morale hacks, cards, gramophones, letters from home, and the rare day of hockey or football on packed snow. Local guides teach survival tricks, how to bank a hut with snow, how to keep a sledge runner waxed, which birch bark lights best. Mixed in is the Allied stew of accents, British sergeants, American corporals, Canadian or French liaison officers, arguing over map squares while the tea freezes.
Sum it up, the gear was a patchwork, the ice was an enemy and a road, and the grit was the only uniform item everyone had in the right size. By winter's peak, the polar bears aren't the same unit that disembarked at Arkhangelsk. They're colder, sharper, and operating on a rulebook that's equal parts field manual and hard-won local wisdom.
Picture this: Europe is ringing bells for the Armistice, but up near the White Sea the shooting doesn't stop. In North Russia the front isn't a line, it's a string of lonely outposts. Each village is a fort, each tree line could be an ambush. That's the stage for 3 hard fights that define the polar bear's year.
First, Toulgas. It isn't a single town so much as a cluster of riverbank hamlets and log huts strung along bends of the northern Dvina. The Americans share the sector with British detachments and local allies. They throw up blockhouses, cut firing slits in timber, and sight Lewis guns to rake the approaches. Red forces test the line with artillery snips and probing night patrols, then try to rush the positions along the river road and through the pines. The defense is textbook winter small unit work, short, savage bursts, runners on skis carrying messages when the field phones ice up, squads peeling back to pre-dug foxholes while another team covers with a Vickers. When the smoke clears, the line holds, but only because everyone does 10 jobs at once: rifleman, carpenter, wireman, and snow shovel operator-in-chief.
The second and most sobering chapter is Shenkursk on the Volga River: deep winter, deep trouble. Red forces mass quietly along forest tracks and frozen streams, then hit with coordinated pressure on the outlying pickets. The town itself is too exposed, its surrounding villages too far apart for quick support. The polar bears and their partners fight a delaying action, grenades and bayonets in spruce thickets, machine gun teams leapfrogging from barn to barn, until the order comes down: withdraw or be pinned and cut off.
That retreat is a feat. Think night marches in 30 below, wounded loaded onto sledges, columns moving by the hiss of breath and the creak of runners. Engineers drop small bridges behind them, spike light guns they can't haul, and torch any stores that would feed the pursuers. Guides read the snow like a map, where drifts hide ditches, where the river ice is groaning thin, and steer the column from one prepared stop to the next. The men arrive frostburned, hungry, and angry, but intact. Shenkursk teaches an ugly lesson: outposts that look fine on a wall map can be death traps when the enemy can skate around you on frozen rivers.
By late winter the Americans are still in the line, but the plan is changing. Relief forces are inbound. The goal is hold what you must, lose nothing you can't replace, and live long enough to sail out when the White Sea opens. That's when the third big fight, Bolshie Ozerki, erupts along the road between Onega and the railway.
Bolshie Ozerki is a defensive clinic in a snow globe. The Allies stitch together a hedgehog of positions, blockhouses facing each approach, interlocking machine gun arcs, and shallow trenches carved into permafrost. They pile snow into breastworks, then ice those walls so they'll shrug off shrapnel. Patrols push out at dawn to cut the enemy's assembly points. At dusk, listening posts settle in so close you can hear leather creak. Red attacks roll in waves, rifle lines flanked by ski detachments feeling for the weak seam. The defenders answer with carefully rationed artillery, short counterpunches, and a lot of grit. When ammunition crates run low, runners sprint sledges from the rear, hunched under incoming fire that sounds like hail on a tin roof. After days of pressure, the line is still there, and the enemy decides it isn't worth the butcher's bill.
Thread these fights together and you get the polar bear playbook: survive the first rush, trade space for time if you must, and make the enemy pay for every step. They learn to read woods and river bends better than any textbook, to keep machine guns dry and firing at minus ridiculous, to shovel snow with one hand and write a casualty list with the other.
And the human part? Letters arrive late or not at all. A man hears about the Armistice months after the fact, while he's crouched behind a log wall that smells like sap and cordite. The stars are so bright the sky looks brittle, trees crack in the cold and everybody flinches. Then the sergeant taps your boot and you're up again, checking wire, counting flares, waiting for the next set of silhouettes to move against the white. That's the White Woods War the polar bears fought, small battles, big distances, and a winter that never took a day off. Spring comes late in the north, and when it does, it doesn't knock, it kicks the door in. Ice on the northern Dvina starts to groan, crack, and then race seaward in black slabs. That's the signal the polar bears have been waiting for, the thaw window that makes ships, and going home, possible.
The withdrawal isn't a single trumpet blast. It's phased. Outlying platoon posts fold back to company strongpoints, company strongpoints collapse into battalion nodes, everything funnels toward the railway in Arkhangelsk. The British relief force slides into positions the Americans vacate, buying time and space. Before leaving, engineers spike anything too heavy to carry, burn what can't be hauled, and mark graves so they can find them again. It's clinical and it's personal.
The checklists get long, turn in weapons that aren't needed on the march, keep what you must until the gangplanks are in sight. Destroy maps and code sheets, keep unit diaries with the adjutant. Pack medical evac first, wounded, trench foot cases, bad frostbite, onto sledges or flat cars. Consolidate rations and ammunition so no forward post runs dry in the final nights. It's logistics as choreography, with the forest as a hostile audience.
At the Arkhangelsk docks and staging camps, the world narrows to routine, medical boards, delousing, inoculations, roll calls that go on forever, and that one sergeant who can find a missing man by sheer volume of voice. Pay officers count out back pay and allowances with mittened hands. Quartermasters issue replacement boots so guys don't step off the ship in America looking like they wrestled a snowblower.
There's a final patrol for some, one more loop through a familiar tree line, one last listen for skis on crusted snow. Then it's baggage parties trundling kit to the quay, company guidance snapping in a cold river breeze, and the gangway thump of hobnails on wood. The men breathe in salt air that doesn't smell like pine smoke or cordite, and their shoulders finally unhunch a little.
The sail out comes in convoys, shepherded by icebreakers if needed. On deck, lifeboat drills, sea air, in that head-spinning moment when the shoreline flattens into horizon. Below decks, card games, letters half-started and finished 3 times, arguments over who snored in Shenkursk, and a surprising number of recipes being traded like baseball cards. A chaplain holds a short service, someone tunes a fiddle, someone else writes down every mile marker in a notebook because it feels important to know how far home is in numbers.
In France, the men process through a base port, Brest for many, where the American Expeditionary Force runs a machine built to turn soldiers into civilians. Showers, fresh uniforms, more shots, more forms. A few get decorations, a few find out their paperwork lost their middle initial and it'll take a small war to get it back. Then it's on to the bigger ships bound west, a last look at the Keys, and the Atlantic in long, rolling lines.
Hoboken is the U.S. front door. Brass bands, harbor whistles, and banners that somehow survived a winter in someone's attic. Reporters ask the same 3 questions, the men give the same 3 answers, with polite edits. After the pier, it's trains, troop cars with coffee urns at the end, a blur of station platforms, and conductors who've perfected the art of herding sleepy privates.
Detroit goes loud. Early July welcomes the polar bears with parades, flags down Woodward Avenue, and family reunions that make headlines and water eyes. The nickname that started as an in-joke and a shoulder patch is now on banners and buttons. Barbers get busy. So do tailors, mothers and sweethearts want uniforms squared away for photographs that will live on mantles for decades.
Then comes the practical coda, demobilization at Camp Custer and other posts. Turn-in rifles and gas masks, final medical checks, a last pay line, a stack of forms that says you were here, you served, you're done. Men peel off into civilian clothes that feel both familiar and strange. Some step back into factory shifts, farms, and classrooms. Others look at their frostbitten toes and wonder how that's going to play on a 12-hour day at the plant.
The mood is complicated. Pride in one another. Relief so strong it makes you dizzy. And questions, what exactly was that mission? Why stay on a northern front after the guns fell silent in France? Families had been writing, petitioning, buttonholing politicians for months to bring the men home. Critics, including future President Warren G. Harding, would later call the whole intervention a mistake. The soldiers don't speak in manifestos, they speak in stories about blockhouses, sledges, and nights that never warmed up.
Officially, the AEF North Russia winds down that summer, the books closed, the unit designations struck, the gear stacked and auctioned. Unofficially, the campaign follows the men home in small ways, a polar bear patch tucked in a drawer, a habit of checking the weather like it's an opponent, friendships hammered hard enough to last a lifetime.
And for too many families, the homecoming is only partial. Some loved ones are missing, buried along river bends and village edges. Their comrades keep the promise that we'll come back for them, a vow that will shape the memory work of the next decade.
So coming home is ships and parades, yes, but it's also paperwork, silence at kitchen tables, and a resolve to remember who didn't step off the train. The polar bears are back in Michigan, but a piece of North Russia, snow, pine, and the hard lessons of a thin front, comes back with them.
The shooting stopped, but the story didn't. Back in Michigan, the polar bears built a second front, memory work. They organized, swapped addresses, and turned their unit nickname into a living network. Reunions became a ritual, coffee in church basements, handshakes that squeezed a year of snow into a second, and tables covered in maps with penciled notes. Here's where Petrov showed us the winter trail, here's the blockhouse with the stove that never drew.
Out of those gatherings came an association with a mission: keep the names alive and bring the missing home. Families had letters that mentioned hurried burials along the Dvina and Volga. Sergeants had sketch maps to small crosses at the edge of villages. Everyone remembered a promise: we'll come back for them.
The recovery work was gritty, quiet, and intensely personal. In the late 1920s, veterans and families coordinated with the VFW and federal officials to send teens back north. Think about that, men who had once fought over those roads returning with shovels, canvas rolls, and lists of names. Local guides led them along timber tracks to half-forgotten plots. The teens chipped into permafrost with picks, read dog tags when they could, and used uniform fragments, dental records, and pocket artifacts, an inscribed knife, a penny, a prayer card, to identify remains.
They brought their brothers home in stages. A first group was returned and laid to rest with full honors on a Memorial Day in the early 1930s. More followed a few years later. The ceremonies were everything at once: military precision and family grief. Rifle salutes cracked the summer air that had been denied to the men in life. Mothers and fathers who had memorized the shape of the word missing finally had a place to stand.
That place became the Polar Bear Memorial at Whitechapel Cemetery in Troy, Michigan, a focal point for the story. The monument's design is deliberate, a polar bear sculpture set above names carved in stone, a clean geometry that says both unit pride and individual lives. Walk around it and the wind threads the pines. On certain days, you can hear nothing but the flags and your own steps, which feels about right.
The memorial isn't static. It's activated every time people show up. Memorial Day services with color guards. Winter gatherings where breath clouds in the air and someone reads a letter from 1919 aloud. School groups tracing letters on the stone with mittened fingers. A great-grandchild holds a photograph next to a name and makes a connection across a century.
The artifacts do their own kind of talking. The white bear shoulder patch on blue cloth. A Mosin Nagant bayonet whose steel smells faintly of oil even now. A Feldgrow scarf traded with a British sergeant. Field notebooks that flick from supply tallies to sketches of river bends. In archives and family attics, the paper trail hums, orders of the day, casualty lists, postcards from Arkhangelsk with ink blurred by snowmelt.
Memory also lives in the stories the veterans chose to tell, and the ones they let sit in silence. At reunions, the funny ones got polished: the stove that smoked out a platoon, the sled that outran an officer on skis. The heavy ones, Shenkursk nights, evacuations under aurora-lit skies, came in fragments, measured and respectful. As years passed, the association's newsletter became a bridge from the original voices to their families.
And there's the politics of memory, too. The men came home to mixed public understanding. Why were you in Russia after the Armistice? The veterans answered in human scale: because my squad was there. Because the outpost needed holding. Because the order said go. They didn't write manifestos, they raised a monument, preserved rosters, and told the truth as they saw it.
When the last polar bears grew old, descendants and local historians picked up the watch. They maintain records, host talks, and bring students to the memorial. The questions evolve about coalition missions, mission creep, and the cost of limited wars, but the center holds the names, the places, the cold that shaped a year.
Here's my favorite detail: the patch many war home, the bear stepping forward, became shorthand for a whole identity. If you know, you know. A small emblem on a sleeve can pull a roomful of stories into focus.
So memory in the snow isn't just about the past being frozen in place. It's about thaw and return, promises kept, remains brought home, lessons revisited. A century later, stand at that memorial and you'll feel two climates at once: Michigan summer on your skin, and a draft of white sea air in the back of your mind.
And maybe that's the right way to remember the polar bears, not as a footnote, but as a compass point, north on the moral map, reminding us what it costs to send a small unit far from home, and what it means to bring them all the way back, in body, in name, and in story. Big picture time. The Polar Bear Expedition is a compact case study in what happens when limited goals meet limitless complications. On paper, the mission was tidy: guard stockpiles, aid in evacuation, avoid the Russian Civil War. On the ground, coalition command structures, seasonal logistics, and an enemy with interior lines turned that tidy plan into a year-long stress test of policy by footnote.
Translation to modern lessons. Ends versus means. If your objectives are narrow but your tools, coalition offensives, forward outposts, push wider, your strategy is already arguing with itself. Coalition friction. Washington's guard duty collided with British plans to stabilize whole corridors. Mixed signals at the political level became mixed missions at the platoon level. Logistics own you: weather, distance, and freeze-thaw cycles can veto intent. Can you resupply it in February? Becomes a more honest strategy question than any speech.
It also previewed a century of narrative warfare. For the Bolsheviks, the Allied landings were Exhibit A in the story of foreign encirclement, propaganda that would echo through the 20th century. For the US, the experience fed domestic skepticism about open-ended commitments and mission creep, familiar chords you'll hear again in Korea, Vietnam, Somalia, Afghanistan. Different maps, same melody, ambiguous aims, complex coalitions, and a tough exit.
Tactically, the Polar Bears wrote a marginalia textbook in the snow: distributed defense, patrol-heavy security, engineers as lifelines, and micro-level intel like tracks and drifts, smoke from chimneys, which logging road carries a sledge faster. That's small warcraft you still see in modern cold weather doctrine and any operation that leans on outpost networks instead of big set-piece battles.
Civil-military dynamics got a workout, too. Field realities tugged on political promises. Commanders balanced survivability against symbolism. What do you hold because it matters, and what do you abandon because living to leave is the real victory? That's a lesson with teeth. Clarity up top saves lives downrange.
And let's talk ethics and locals. Every limited intervention sits inside somebody else's home. The Polar Bears traded with villagers, hired guides, and fought in and around communities that would remember all of it long after the flag sailed away. Modern planners call it civil considerations. The men called it Wednesday.
Memory is part of the warning label. The veterans built an association, raised a monument, and spent years bringing home the missing. That's not just sentiment, it's policy feedback. If you send a unit far, plan the return, bodies, stories, and truth included. The cost doesn't end when the last ship clears the ice.
Bottom line, the Polar Bear Expedition matters because it compresses the hard questions of the 20th century into one snow-filled year. What are we trying to do? Who's actually in charge? What happens when the map fights back? Answer badly and your soldiers wind up solving strategic problems with shovels and sledges.
Plus, and this is crucial, despite the nickname, the Americans did not battle real polar bears. The actual bears maintained strict neutrality, except for occasional unauthorized inspections of unattended rations. They are truly bipartisan on the question of snacks.
So the warning is clear, and the legacy is sharper than the wind off the Dvina. Define the mission, align the coalition, respect the logistics, and write the exit before you write the orders. The Polar Bears learned it the hard way so the rest of us could learn it at all. That's our march with the Polar Bear Expedition, a cold chapter with hot debates that still echo. If you want to dive deeper, we've got maps, photos, and reading links in the show notes, including Michigan's excellent archival collection and battle summaries.
Quick reminders before we go, all our episodes are evergreen, so share this one with a friend who loves unexpected corners of history. We've got new merch, teas, mugs, and a hoodie warm enough for Arkhangelsk. Links in the show notes.
And you can suggest future topics anytime, DM us on social, tag us in your hot takes, or send a note. All our links are in the show notes. Want to dive on the Siberian expedition? A mini-series on the Czechoslovak Legion? Tell us.
If you had a good time, please rate, subscribe, and share, and it genuinely helps if you leave a 5-star review. That little tap makes a big difference in helping the show grow and reach more history nerds.
For the History AI podcast, I'm Chuck.
I'm Marco. Stay curious, stay kind, and keep your boots dry.
See you next time.
They pulled us out of Michigan, called us Custer's men, put a polar bear on canvas bags and shipped us north again, past the end of all the rail lines where the white sea bites the air. We were kids from down on Gratiot, learning how to fight the glare. Snow sang like a steel saw, night was more than just the dark. We rode home by candle stub, signed with trembling hearts. Bring us home from Archangel, we don't belong out here. The guns went quiet in France last fall, but winter's loud and clear on the Dvina and the Vaga. We learned a code of prayer, we never saw a polar bear, just fought the winter there. Boots froze to the floorboards, rifles seized with breath, Valaga tracks to nowhere, white wood spelling death. We held these little villages, names we couldn't say, trading shots with shadows that slip back in the gray. Letters kissed with lampblack, folded hope and fear. Tell Ma I miss the Tigers, tell Pa I'll get home this year. Bring us home from Archangel, we don't belong out here. The war's a ghost that won't sit still, it lingers in our gear. On the Dvina and the Vaga, we learned a code of prayer, we never saw a polar bear, just fought the winter there. Marching on a moonless road, sledges scratch a metronome. Captain says hold fast, hold, boys we're going home. But the compass spins like rumor and the map is only air. So we sing to keep from freezing, counting breaths like flares. Bring us home, bring us home. From the white, from the wire, from the cold in our bones. Bring us home. Bring us home from Archangel. Our coats are cut from prayer. 1,000 miles of silence and the world forgets we're there. If memory builds a monument, carve never saw a polar bear, just fought the winter there.